One of the most important questions that school clinicians can be asking is, what services do my kids need, and how do I make sure that they get those things? However, this isn't often the question that they ask. Usually, when I hear questions from clinicians, this is true for speech pathologists, it's true for a lot of the other school service personnel as well, social workers, OTs. It's kind of true across the board. A lot of times, what people ask is, what should I do in my sessions when I have a student in front of me? So I think this is not the right question to be asking. My name is Dudek-Brannan, and I help pediatric therapists be better leaders so that they can make a bigger impact with their services. And today I wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of integrated service delivery. So obviously, if you are a person who is in charge of providing some kind of specialized services for kids, whether you are a psychologist, a social worker, a speech pathologist, an occupational therapist, a special ed teacher, or a reading specialist, you know that it can be really complicated when it comes to figuring out how to meet your students' individual needs, especially when you are trying to coordinate with an IEP, or if you have a child who has an IEP, but then they also are getting other services outside the school and all of those things. And so a lot of times in the professional groups that I am in, people will be asking what they should be doing. And obviously, we all have our own individual disciplines and areas of expertise. So we do have unique roles where there's, in certain cases, these are typically the things that you're going to be working on. And those things might stay consistent across all of your students that you have on your caseload to some extent. You might follow the same general framework or do a lot of the same things for one kid versus the other kid if they have a particular diagnosis or need. But the thing is that a lot of times there are things that sort of overlap in scope, or there are certain things that are things that need to be considered across the board. And if you just start with the question of figuring out what you're doing and then try to fit it in with what everybody else is doing, things can be a little bit disjointed. Let me give you a specific example from my experience. So I'm a speech pathologist. I spent 14 years in the school systems. And so obviously my area of expertise was language and literacy. I had certain protocols that were kind of my go-to thing that I would, have kind of in my back pocket that would be my starting point for therapy, especially if I had a student who I knew had some language literacy issues. And I knew that these were probably things that I was going to be working on in therapy. This could be things like syntax, morphology, all of those things, the language skills that are going to be supporting literacy. But there were a lot of other things that I potentially could have been working on that would have been really important to layer on top of those things. One of those things is executive functioning. So again, the skills that require you to engage in internal self-directed planning that allows you to self-regulate, attend, monitor your own behavior, engage in planning, and focus and attention, those types of skills, things that are important for academic tasks like reading and comprehension and writing, but also things that are important just for life, for everything. So that is something that with executive functioning, yes, as a speech pathologist, I am uniquely qualified to work on that and in many cases be the lead in doing the executive functioning intervention for students because of my expertise in language and literacy. But I am not the only one that is qualified to be working on that or that should be working on that. Really, everybody should be hitting it at some level across the board. The teachers, the other therapists who are working on skills with students, or the parents in the home setting. That is huge. Parents need to be working on this as well because they're the ones that see kids in all of these functional settings that, us as school practitioners, we don't necessarily get that access to students in those functional settings like parents do. So my point being is that when I think about those types of things, I wouldn't just ask the question of what should I be doing in my sessions to support executive functioning. I had to think about what everybody else was doing, because maybe the social worker was doing some kind of peer groups with students and was doing something that, for students who are having a hard time building social relationships. And so it wouldn't have made sense for them to do their, little social skills groups over here, and then me do my groups over here that's working on language, and us to kind of work on executive functioning. What we should really do is work together and come up with a plan to figure out how to support executive functioning across settings. So we've got to think about, okay, how are we going to support students in the classroom with these types of skills? How are we going to support students, during the unstructured time during the day when they have to apply those social executive functioning skills, reading the room and things like that. So the times that we actually that are the best times to work on those skills. So rather than us trying to just, think about this very disjointed approach, we should be working together to figure out how we can support these skills across the board. And so it would make a lot more sense to, again, ask the question of, what does this child need and how do I make sure that they get it? Because there are probably cases with that specific example of the collaboration between speech pathology and social work where I could probably do some things on my end that would support executive functioning and literacy. So for example, I might do some things that would involve giving some parents some information about things that they can be doing in the home setting to help their kids with some of the functional tasks, with homework completion at home, with providing structure in the home setting, with supporting kids in social situations in the home environment or outside of school. So I could be doing those types of things. The social worker could be doing those things as well. But it doesn't make sense for us to do them in a disjointed way. There might be cases where if I ask the question of what the child needs and figure out how they can get it, just because I'm qualified to do all of those things doesn't mean I have to be doing all of those things. Maybe the social worker can do some of those things, and then that gives me more bandwidth to focus on the academic language skills. Or, maybe there's a situation where the student isn't getting social work. And so I know for those types of students, I might have to be the one that's doing all of those things that I mentioned. But if you don't start first with the big picture, you're thinking about all the services that students have access to, then it makes it really hard to figure out what you actually should be doing. So we have to consider the big picture first before we start to consider the minutia. So I know this example that I gave has to do with social work, speech pathology, but this can be true regardless, for other disciplines as well, for occupational therapy, for physical therapy. If you're a special ed teacher or a reading specialist, and maybe the student isn't getting social work and speech services and they need work on some of these skills. Obviously your plan and the way that you'd answer the question of what am I doing with my students is going to be very different depending on what all they have access to. If they have access to, maybe they're seeing an outside therapist, then that could change what you actually do in your therapy, because they might be able to address some of the things that you normally would be addressing, which frees up more time for you to work on other things, because now you know that somebody else is covering those bases. So if we really want to give students the support that they need across the board, we've got to start with that big picture first, and we've got to start asking the right questions. So instead of saying, what should I be doing in therapy? We should ask the question, what does the child need and how do I make sure that they get it? Because it maybe doesn't always have to be you providing that. It could be somebody else. It can be, you can delegate and spread your knowledge with other people who can help you along so you can divide and conquer and really provide good support for kids. So this is really one of the shifts that I think that clinicians can make when it comes to thinking of themselves as not just therapists, but also leaders. So clinical leaders. So even if you are in the trenches and you're not in an official leadership position, you can actually be a leader right now. Whether it means that you just want to revamp your current role so you feel like you have more autonomy and impact in the way that you show up for your caseload, or whether you're considering a career transition in the future. Maybe you want to move on to a supervisor or leadership position. Maybe you want to start a practice or a business, or just, figure out how to gain some experience and skills that are going to help you to boost your resume and your portfolio so that you can actually get some leadership experience. You can start doing that now. You don't have to wait for someone to designate you officially into a leadership position. You can lead from wherever you are at right now. And that is what I aim to share with clinicians, and what I show you how to do in my clinical leadership manifesto, which is basically an ebook, a free guide that walks through 5 shifts to thinking like a leader and really understanding how you can make a bigger impact on your caseload. So to check out that manifesto, just go to drkarendudek-brannan.com/leadership manifesto, and you'll be able to download a copy. Again, that's drkarendudek-brannan.com/leadership manifesto.